So we're very excited. This presentation was our #1 pick from the community. And we're very excited to have Carolyn Wong and Robert Wood sort of talk about office politics. Woohoo! Take it away.
Thank you so much. Is this on? Is this hello? You guys can hear me. So when you hear the word office politics, what do you think of? This is the audience participation portion of the talk. Office space. Office space. I thought about suggesting an office space photo for the slides, but in your day-to-day work, what are the scenarios that you encounter having to do with office politics?
So we have to implement something that a control or something that's going to make. Oh, sorry.
We are taking this for other people.
Oh, sorry. So we have to implement a control that other departments are required to follow, but not necessarily do we have to follow it. And so it's difficult to influence them to follow it if they're in a separate, should I say silo?
Yeah, thank you.
Old staff versus new staff. The bad habits of the past or the bad habits of the present fighting against one another.
Thank you.
Chris, you
I'm just going to pause the thing.
Okay. So really quickly, so who knows who this is? Any takers? So this is, what's up?
Machiavelli.
That is Machiavelli. Ethan knows because I'm a big Machiavelli fan. But Machiavelli or Machiavellian, being Machiavellian is a term oftentimes very tightly coupled with politics. It usually specifies or describes some kind of zero-sum game where somebody's being very manipulative and self-serving to get ahead of things. We probably all know who this is for any House of Cards fans. Frank Underwood, another very Machiavellian-like character, oftentimes also associated with, in a very negative light, with getting ahead, self-serving in an office setting. So at the expense of others advancing their own cause. But we want to try to use office politics and frame it in a little bit more positive light. So instead of thinking about it as a big zero-sum game where I or anybody else who is playing office politics or experiencing office politics, where they are slashing down their coworkers or their business partners or their boss or whoever. Instead, we're going to think about it as the strategies and the tactics that one might use to advance their cause. And so the gentleman here mentioned a little bit ago, when he thinks about office politics, what comes to mind is trying to get in place some security capability or some security control to a siloed off department or business unit, which is oftentimes very, very difficult. And we have to find ways to influence when we don't have direct control. That is a great scenario. That is a great situation where playing some office politics in a positive light, influencing in a positive manner, can really, really help. And so why do office politics really matter? They matter because, we working in the security industry, we want to see the organizations that we're working with, obviously, protecting themselves. We don't want to see the data that we're responsible for protecting end up on Pastebin or end up on a torrent site or end up, being referenced in some front page New York Times article. However, this is oftentimes how you could think about an enterprise security team. They have some great set of controls and capabilities. There's a path from how things should happen, how code gets developed maybe. So somebody starts back there and they're supposed to get back here. And they're supposed to flow through that security gate, or at least this is oftentimes how things get structured in a typical process. Except because we don't have really inclusive processes, and because we're oftentimes trying to demand and dictate instead of influence and work together, we end up in a situation like this where people are just literally walking right around the gates in which we put in place. They're finding ways around process to just ship code anyways because the business needs to function regardless of whether security is there. So What we do not want as security teams is to end up being viewed as perpetual blockers in an organization. The second that you get viewed as a blocker, bad things start to happen for you. So you start to get routed around. There's a lot of communication disconnects. I've lived and breathed this stuff. It's not pleasant. You end up spending way more time fighting communications fires and misunderstandings than you do actually making things more secure. Because people are just routing around you, you may end up with a decreased security posture. So they may be shipping code that hasn't gone through proper testing, proper vetting, does not conform to security policy. And because people are not engaging with you, you may see a drop-off in security awareness or just general knowledge about what security policies are or best practices are that people should be conforming to. And so what we want to kind of plant in everyone's head through this talk is that security teams need to start to rethink what they are to the business, to rethink their position so that they are framing themselves as enablers instead of protectors. They are enablers to help people work safer, to deliver safer, more resilient code, and to help them do it faster. All right.
We should go to introductions.
Oh, we can go to introductions.
So we got really excited about this topic, and we dove right in without introducing ourselves. So we're going to go back to the beginning and tell you who we are. My name is Caroline Wong. I'm the Vice President of Security Strategy at Cobalt, and I've been in this industry for 12 years now. I started out on the Global Information Security team at eBay, where I learned a lot about office politics because I couldn't figure out why people didn't just want to do the right thing as far as I was concerned. I transitioned over to Zynga, the Farmville company, and when I transitioned out of that organization, I deleted all the games off of my phone. I went over to Symantec to do some product management, did some management consulting at Cigital, and now I'm at a startup in San Francisco. So have experienced and observed a lot of different conversations, both successful and less than successful. And so really pleased to have the opportunity to share some of those stories with you today.
All right. And again, my name is Robert Wood. I'm currently the Director of Trust at a company called Nuna. We're a small healthcare analytics startup based out of San Francisco. I've also had a little bit of experience both on the consulting side as well as the product side, and have also seen a lot of conversations or political situations go horribly wrong as well as very, very well. And so this is kind of a roll-up of everything that I've seen both set on fire and go smoothly. All right. Getting back to where we were.
Cool. So now Bob and I are going to kind of go back and forth and share a few stories of successful communication strategies. The first that I want to talk about is one where when I was on the eBay team, when it came to application security, we were building this pile of vulnerabilities. So we would do scanning, we would do pen testing, we had responsible disclosure, and so we would find out about vulnerabilities through all sorts of different means, and we kept track of them. And every week, maybe every 2 weeks, we would go to the development teams and we would beg them to fix them. And we would try our best to convince them that every vulnerability was important, more important than whatever it was they were doing. We didn't necessarily take the time or ask what they were doing and what their priorities were, but this was like a broken record. It happened again and again. We would get a new set of vulnerabilities. We would beg them to please fix them. We would return to our desks muttering to ourselves about, our frustrations and, and it just wasn't working. And we couldn't figure out why. And working like that can become very tiresome. It can feel like the work that you're doing doesn't matter because finding security problems is only one part of one side of the coin. In order to actually make the applications more secure, they have to get fixed too. But we couldn't fix the code because we weren't the developers. Even if we had those skill sets, it wasn't our responsibility. We didn't have access. And so what ended up happening was we convinced our boss, the CISO, to have a conversation with the vice president of engineering. And we said, look, we've got to have this conversation at a decision-making level. And so our boss, the CISO, approached the vice president of engineering and said, look, we run an e-commerce company that allows strangers to transact over the internet. The security of our applications is as much your responsibility as mine. And the vice president of engineering couldn't argue with that. And so they agreed, we're going to jointly own this goal of improving the security of the code. Now, meanwhile, the application security team went and spoke with the developers, and we said, what are you working on? What's your day-to-day life like? What are your priorities? What are your quarterly goals that you need to meet? And it became apparent to us, once we began to have that conversation, that we were just a pain that they had to deal with that was getting in the way of them getting their quarterly goals accomplished, and their bonuses were tied to those quarterly goals. So no wonder they were shooing us out the door every time we came and tried to explain how something could potentially be exploited. So we talked to them and we said, look, our bosses have agreed that this is a priority. Can we talk about you setting some time aside to focus on fixing security issues that are found? You have the buy-in from your boss. He understands that this is a priority for you. And we actually came up with the number 20%. So we said across all of our applications, on such and such date, we're going to take a baseline number of, how many, it was really a defect density number. What's the number of vulnerabilities that you have per million lines of code or something like that. And we took those numbers down, and every month we would check in. And we said, okay, in Q1, we're going to reduce those by 5%, by 10%, by 15%, by 20%. And we were actually able to do that. Now, if it had been totally up to the information security team, we probably would have set a number like 90. We probably would have set a number like 100. And we may not have gotten very far. But because we were having the conversations both at the executive level to have decision maker buy-in, as well as the working team level to understand really what was reasonable in terms of the bandwidth that folks could dedicate to this problem, we jointly came up with that 20% number, and both the teams and the executives were able to present that as a success by the end of the year.
Awesome. So what I'm going to talk about is regarding building a security-aware culture. So this was one thing, when I first joined Nuna, I came in as a consultant initially and then made the transition to full-timer. And when I first showed up, it was interesting. There was a security mindfulness, but it was a very shamey, almost programmer-like security-aware culture. So, if somebody left their laptop unlocked, they had to wear this god-awful itchy sweater that they called the security sweater. And they had to have this big HIPAA hammer. It was like Thor's hammer on their desk, and it was a very shame-heavy culture. And it also had people very much zeroed in on very, very specific issues, and not really the things that were most concerning for us. So building a cloud-based set of products, things that are happening in the office are not necessarily the most crazy, risky things for us as an organization, for our particular threat model. And so what we had to do is basically find a way to break out of that mold, still, of course, embrace the good things that came from that, and find ways to build partners around the organization in a more social networky way. And so what we ended up doing is creating a very positive atmosphere around security. So we created awards. We would deputize people to kind of speak authoritatively about security if they had intelligent or correct things to say, if they were working on security-related things in their particular project. We created an internal bug bounty to reward security-minded thinking. We would call people out in all-hands meetings, in Slack channels, things like that. We would really try to celebrate celebrate security-minded thinking in any capacity that that was furthering our particular objectives. And one thing that I think really helped here is we were not necessarily the ones doing all of the work. We were back channeling a lot of this work, but at the forefront of everything, what we ended up doing is finding other people to represent our mission, our goals. And so that's what I mean by finding proxies in this case. We had proxy individuals around the organization who were pillars of success and of security-minded thinking that we could point to and that other people could look up to as an example, because they're much more relatable from a security perspective than we are, those who are coming in from from like professionals from the industry, these wizards of black magic and such who can hack anything and blah blah blah. We have a very whimsical kind of idea around us when we go into and start talking with engineers. So we wanted to avoid that and make it more accessible to break down barriers. I think we should probably skip over the last story and
move on.
Keep plugging. These slides will be available, so you can always dig in later.
And you can always
message us
and we can tell you the rest.
Yes. So shifting gears a little bit away from some positive stories, we wanted to offer some tips for actually managing office politics, and we'll break these up into like 3 main sections. So the first is when you're actually approaching somebody and starting to have discussions around security or have discussions around your particular roadmap or agenda. 4 main things that I want to really leave people with. The first is come in seeking answers instead of knowing the answer. A lot of times, and I've been guilty of this myself, I'll come to a situation and let's say some code is broken. Let's say somebody mishandled data, something like that. If I come in and just start telling them all of the ways that they are wrong, they're going to instantaneously shut down, not listen to me, not engage. They may answer my questions, but it's going to be short-term gain for long-term sacrifice. So come in seeking to understand why something might have happened, why code is written a certain way. Maybe there's a library that they're reliant upon because of some piece of user functionality that hasn't been upgraded in forever. Who knows what it is? Maybe there's some lackluster process or old technology that they have to rely on that almost forces them to act in an insecure way or doesn't give them a lot of choices. The other thing is, or the next big thing is showing empathy towards other teams' goals. So building off of Caroline's story, other teams are there to provide the organization you're working in value in their own right. We're there to protect things and to help make things more secure. They're there to do whatever it is their particular function services. So we have to show empathy to whatever it is other teams are trying to do, whether it's a finance team, an IT team, keeping the lights on, engineering teams building products, whatever it is. Being ready to give ground in a negotiation. So don't go in asking for this much, always not leaving that conversation unless you get 100% of the things that you want. You have to be willing to compromise. Because you're expecting somebody else to compromise on their goals. And so if you're always the one who is drawing a firm line in the sand, not willing to budge, you're going to find yourself eventually, over time, getting blocked out and routed around. And then the last thing is being ready to challenge yourself on the means to which you are trying to achieve some end. And I want to make a parallel into government military land, being that we are having a politics discussion, in that you can think about the U.S. government trying to achieve some political objective. They have a number of different tools at their disposal, as do we as security teams. In the government's case, they might choose between diplomacy, finding a proxy state of their own, or sometimes using military force, all to achieve some bigger, broader objective. And I think it's worth always asking yourself if the approach that you're going in with, force, diplomacy, finding somebody else to do it, is the right way to do it. I have some very negative stories where I've used my team's resources in a forceful manner to just go in and get things done. And while we accomplished our initial objective, the aftermath of that was kind of atrocious. So I would be happy to share those stories afterwards.
So another tip that Bob and I thought about sharing with you guys as we were coming up with the slides for our talk is try and speak your audience's language. I remember that, before I would go in for a meeting with a stakeholder, I would look them up on LinkedIn. I would search for their name if they had been talked about in the news, and I would try to find out about them as a person and also about what they were trying to accomplish in the business. So these are just a couple ideas about different audiences that you might speak to and different messages that might be more or less relevant to those audiences. If you jumbled this up, then it might not make sense. For example, to talk to your CFO about vulnerability management, that's probably not a message that's going to really resonate with somebody in that role. Now, granted, every organization is different, and it is really important to understand the roles of the folks that you're talking to. Sometimes you can just build relationships with people by meeting with them over a cup of coffee and simply asking the question, what's your top priority these days? That can give you some leverage, because if you can figure out what their top priority is, if there's a way to tie what you're working on to that, then there's natural alignment in your two causes. So this is, this is probably my favorite slide that we're talking about. And this particular line is Bob's, which is, don't be a security person, be a business person with a security lens. For as much time as you spend reading up on the latest security news and trying to understand what happened with the last breach and trying to figure out technically exactly how, the latest 0 day that was released works, spend that much time trying to figure out how your business makes money. One of the things that I actually really like about working for a startup is I've never been so close to the business before. And in one of our one-on-ones, I said to my boss, I really like learning about the money side of what's going on for us, because that's really interesting. And I have this book to give away to someone in the audience, one of the folks who participated in our brief audience participation thing at the beginning. And I'm not going to read all of the stuff that I was originally going to, because we're 2 minutes away from time. But I just want to say that, so roughly defined, a business is a repeatable process that creates and delivers something of value that other people want or need at a price they're willing to pay in a way that satisfies the customer's needs and expectations, so that the business brings in enough profit to make it worthwhile for the owners to continue operation. Something that I've thought about a lot is you wouldn't buy a $200 fence to protect a $5 asset. And the whole point of security is to protect the business. So if we don't understand the business, what is it that we're doing exactly?
Cool. So wrapping up, we wanted to leave everyone with 4 really quick things. I'll let Caroline actually run through them.
Yeah, so when you're doing something, you can think to yourself, my priority is A, B, C, and I need to get all these other people to just step in line, And there are different ways to do that. And sometimes, what is it? Like something about catching more bees with honey or something? Like sometimes it takes time, right? Bob has talked about when he's working with his team to do stakeholder buy-in activities, sometimes an individual will say, but that's going to make our project take twice as long as it would otherwise. But if you really need them to buy in, your project's not going to succeed unless you have them on board. Businesses are trying to do more than just be secure. Even when you work for a business that's all about security, it still needs to make money in order to keep going on. Be curious. Again, for as curious as you are about security topics, try and apply some of that curiosity to what's going on in your business and in your organization. And finally, consider the consequences of your actions, because if you or someone on your team pisses someone off that's actually really important to getting what you need to get done, then you're going to have to deal with that later down the road.
All right. And that is all we have. So thank you so much.
Do you have any questions? We have a mic.
Got a mic? Hold on. So I really appreciate all of the tips or the the items you gave for using to implement something. So what I'm thinking of is a situation where we do a lot of root cause analysis. And when we do the root cause analysis, that can be very political.
Yeah.
Especially when you're trying to...
It's a blame game sometimes, right? How do you not make it a blame game?
It's a finger-pointing game, right? Yeah. So we've gotten really good at doing the root cause analysis. Gotten past that initial aspect of everybody trying to blame everybody else. So getting that done is all well and good. The problem where we stumble is getting that information out. We don't want to send that information out for awareness and for learning, for fear of, as you said, pissing someone off. So how do we get past the emotional aspect of getting root cause analysis out? And the second part of my question is, when we do a root cause analysis, we also have to do a remediation plan and a mitigation plan. And remediation is all well and good, and it's easy because we now know the root cause and we can just get it done, and it's done.
Sure.
But the mitigation plan is what keeps going on and on and on and on. And so somebody has to take responsibility to do that and add that to their normal workload.
Yep.
How do you get over the political aspect of that in addition to sending out that information for awareness?
So I've got an idea, and I'll run briefly. So there's an incident, there's a post-mortem, there's whatever you do going forward. And there's a way to frame that says, we messed up, here's how we're going to fix it. There's a different way to look at it that says, here's what we want our future to look like. Here's what we want our outcome to be, and therefore we're going to do these things. And maybe that kind of positioning, looking toward the future and saying, what do we want it to look like versus how do we not be like that, might be one way to think of it.
Yeah, I would also say, like, in terms of sending things out, that relying on whoever it is you're working with to distribute that information. So we found this in enforcing policies at Nuna, where we don't necessarily want, we're not the developers of some policies, we're not the critical stakeholders, but we're left in if we're the ones kind of communicating everything out, we're left in a judge, jury, executioner position. And so we've kind of got buy-in from other people in the org to have them start communicating, like the other stakeholders in the process to communicate. And so it changes the way that people interpret and internalize the information if it's not always just security coming down with the hammer on things. So I found that to be a really useful tip.
Yeah, just to add on to that, one of the things that we've been doing in our organization, and actually did this with my former coworkers over here, is that as we handle incidents, and this is even with the regular IT management, is actually develop a communications management program. Tech people are really not great at disseminating information. As you mentioned, you're really you're trying to have some empathy and some sensitivities about who the audience is, but we're really not good at it. There's much better people that can do that. And if you build that into how you are doing your work, it actually is a lot more effective, and you get over that political hump because you understand that you're actually crafting a message, whether it be for an incident or a decision-making thing that is specifically understanding who that target audience is.
Yeah, I think it's Spotify. They released a really solid guide on doing blameless postmortems. I think it was Spotify, but if you just Google blameless postmortems, there's a really, really good write-up on one of the big tech companies did it, and it's phenomenal. So would also recommend and plug that. And we're probably out of time. But.
One more.
Okay,
we're done.
Sweet.
Cool.
Can you address the internal policy plus politics surrounding certifications plus hiring policies or mixed teams where some have teams plus others don't have certifications? Because I have no certs, but I've been doing this for 20 years, and they call me to solve their problems through my startup.
Okay, so can I regurgitate the question just to make sure I get it? So
basically what I'm asking is there's people without certs, right?
Yeah.
Who've been in the industry for years.
Yeah.
Who are basically called to solve problems with people who have certs. Take this test,
Sure.
And it's just a fill-in test, but in a real-world application, they cannot do it. They don't have the skills.
Sure.
Like, I've been in meetings where you talk about basic reverse engineering things, and they just don't understand what you're talking about. It's like, well, how are you a CSO?
Sure.
Because, you know what I mean?
Well, first, I would not expect any CSO to really understand reverse engineering in a really, like, they should know what it is, but if you go talk to like any senior executive, they're like, and show them assembly, it's, but I would, like, the way I would respond to that, like, I don't have any certs, for example, and like, I've done reversing, I've done hardware hacking, I've led programs, I've done threat modeling, I've done a ton of things when I was consulting, and now I'm running a team, and I like to think about this purely in terms of merit. Like, if somebody is, like me as a hiring manager, if somebody has merit, whether they have certs or not, a consultant who has certs or not, like, I go with the person who has merit and who has like a combination of soft and hard skills. So, like, certs are great in terms of like breaking down some hiring barriers for organizations that are really like, strict like that. Like the government is a good example of that. They, have certain boxes to check for certain roles, but I would encourage any hiring manager to drop that from their requirements, because like there's plenty of good people without certs. So,
yeah. If I can insert a brief perspective, I was in a workshop the other day, and it was full of CISOs, and they were talking about how do we present our security programs to the board. And one of the things that came up a lot is we really have to dumb it down for these people. And I thought that was incorrect, because these people didn't get on the board of directors by being dumb. They're just not smart about what we're smart about. And so I think it's really important to own your knowledge and own your skills, but also understand that someone in a position of authority or power, and not to say that sometimes people who maybe shouldn't be in a manager role or an executive role get there, but if someone's at that level, you have an opportunity to teach them. And hopefully they're not treating you poorly because of a lack of some letters after your title.
Well, let's thank Carolyn and Bob for a great presentation.